Before this video ends, you will see the ancient world differently, and you will never look at a map of Asia the same way again. Somewhere between the 9th and 15th centuries, a network of trade routes stretched across the South China Sea like veins beneath skin. Ships moved through it carrying gold, beeswax, forest resins, and porcelain. The winds dictated the schedule. The monsoon was the calendar. And at the center of this living, breathing commercial web sat a collection of islands that most people, even today, struggle to place correctly on a timeline. The Philippines, before the Spanish, before the colonial name, before the erasure. Most people learn about the Silk Road as a land story. Camel caravans, desert oases, Central Asian kingdoms. That version is incomplete. The maritime branch of that trading world cut directly through the Philippine archipelago. Filipino merchants were not passive recipients of Chinese goods. They were active nodes, negotiators. Risk-takers with their own currencies, their own weights and measures, their own political leverage. This story was not lost by accident. Think about it. The scale of what existed here before 1565 is staggering. Archaeological digs across Luzon, the Visayas, and Mindanao have pulled from the earth thousands of ceramic pieces. Song Dynasty, Yuan Dynasty, Ming Dynasty porcelain, found in burial sites in middens, in the floors of ancient settlements. These were not gifts. They were not tribute. They were trade goods, exchanged through sustained commercial relationships that spanned centuries. Chinese records from the Song period describe foreign merchants arriving at Quanzhou, one of the great port cities of medieval China, carrying goods from places they called Mai and Sulu. Historians have matched these names to Mindoro and the Sulu archipelago. Filipino traders were physically present in Chinese ports. They had their own quarters, their own reputations, their own return customers. Stop for a moment and sit with that image. A Filipino merchant somewhere around the year 1100, walking the docks of Quanzhou, negotiating in a pidgin trade language, carrying beeswax, forest resins, and raw gold from the Philippine highlands, leaving with porcelain and silk that would travel back across the sea to be buried with a chieftain in what is now Batangas or Cebu. That is not a footnote. That is a civilization. The political structure that made this trade possible was not chaotic. The barangay system, small, kinship-based political units led by a datu, was actually a remarkably efficient commercial framework. Each datu controlled access to local resources. Each barangay was a trading unit. When Chinese merchants arrived on Philippine shores, they did not deal with a vacuum. They dealt with organized local leadership that had its own terms and its own non-negotiables. Think about it. The datu was not just a chief. Truly chief. He was a broker. Chinese sources describe local rulers receiving foreign traders with protocol. There were gift exchanges that functioned like modern letters of credit, establishing trust before contracts could exist. The Filipino side of these negotiations understood leverage. If one trading partner became difficult, there were others. Arab and Malay merchants competed for access to the same Philippine ports. Filipino datus played them against each other with a sophistication that deserves the word diplomatic. Here is where the story gets complicated. And the complication lives in one specific document that most people have never heard of. Wait a second. The Ming Dynasty's official records, the historical compilations that form the backbone of imperial memory, contain references to the Philippines that are sparse to the point of being suspicious. Given the volume of trade documented through archaeology, through independent Arabic sources, through the records of Malay kingdoms, the thinness of the Chinese imperial record feels deliberate. Not necessarily because of a grand conspiracy, but because of something more structural and more honest: tributary diplomacy. Now pay attention. The Ming court organized its view of the world through a tribute system. Foreign nations were ranked by how often they sent tribute missions to Beijing. States that sent missions were recorded. States that traded independently without performing the ritual submission of a tribute mission were minimized in the official record. Filipino polities, particularly in the earlier centuries, traded on their own terms. They did not always play the tributary game. So the imperial scribes, whose job was to record the world as the emperor needed to see it, simply wrote them smaller than they were. But there's a detail. The Silk Road did not disappear for the Filipinos. The bureaucratic imagination of a tribute-centered empire did. This is a critical distinction. It shifts the frame from victimhood to agency. Filipino merchants were not erased because they were weak. They were underwritten in Chinese records because they were too independent to fit neatly into the imperial ledger. Their commercial power existed precisely outside the system that recorded power. Laguna, 1989. A corroded bronze plate pulled from a riverbed near Manila Bay. Inscribed in a script mixing Old Malay, Old Javanese, and Sanskrit. Dated to 900 CE. The Laguna copperplate inscription, the oldest known written document found in the Philippines, describes the settlement of a debt. Not a prayer, not a royal decree. A commercial transaction. The very first written word from Philippine history is about trade. Let that breathe. The document mentions a place called Tondo, a place called Medang. It uses titles from the Hindu-Buddhist world that connected the Philippines to a much larger Indian Ocean trading network that predates Chinese contact. By 900 CE, the Philippines was already integrated into a web of commerce so wide it touched 3 civilizations simultaneously. The Chinese world to the north, the Malay-Javanese world to the south, and the Indian cultural sphere flowing through both. Filipino identity, at its oldest recoverable layer, is mercantile. It is maritime. It is not rooted in isolation, it is rooted in connection. On the other hand, the gold is important here. Philippine gold. Archaeologists have recovered pre-colonial gold artifacts of extraordinary craftsmanship. The golden Tara of Agusan, the Surigao treasure, burial masks and ritual objects of startling beauty and technical precision. Well, these were not decorative. Gold was currency, and Philippine gold circulated across the region. Arab geographers, writing in the 9th and 10th centuries, described islands east of the Malay Peninsula as places where gold was abundant. The weight of that evidence points directly at the Philippine archipelago. A civilization sitting on this much gold and this much maritime expertise did not simply wait for customers to arrive. On the other hand, the ships, the balangay, long, sleek wooden vessels built without metal nails, held together by wooden pegs and fiber lashing, in a technique that allowed the hull to flex in open ocean swells without cracking. The 1976 excavation in Butuan unearthed the physical remains of these boats, dated to as early as the 4th century CE. These were not fishing boats, these were blue water trading vessels. Built for crossing open sea, built for commerce at range. Butuan itself deserves more than a footnote. Alright. Butuan in northern Mindanao was one of the most significant trading ports in maritime Southeast Asia during the 10th and 11th centuries. Chinese records describe Butuan sending tribute missions, which in this context means commercial delegations, to the Song court. The rulers of Butuan had converted to or adopted the prestige symbols of Hindu-Buddhist kingship, which was the regional signal for international commercial legitimacy. Butuan was playing the game at the highest level. It understood that political theater and commercial ambition were the same instrument. Think about it. The Sulu Sultanate, which rose to prominence somewhat later, became one of the most powerful trading polities in Southeast Asia. Sulu controlled the flow of goods between the Philippines, Borneo, and China, with a grip that regional powers, including China, had to respect rather than simply ignore. At its peak, Sulu's commercial network was not a local operation. It was a regional power with maritime force to back its trade agreements. Power, when it moves through water, leaves fewer monuments, fewer walls. You know, fewer ruins that survive for tourists. But it leaves ceramics, it leaves gold, it leaves documents in bronze, it leaves hull timbers in river sediment. The evidence of Filipino mercantile civilization is not hidden. It is simply spread thin across disciplines: archaeology, linguistics, maritime history, Chinese administrative records, in a way that requires assembly. Interesting fact, the Spanish arrival in 1565 did not find a blank slate. They found a literate, commercially sophisticated, politically organized world. They found a population that understood currency, contract, and leverage. The colonial narrative that followed, built to justify conquest, needed to flatten that prehistory into something manageable, into something less threatening, into people waiting to be saved rather than people who had been conducting international trade for 700 years before a European ship appeared on the horizon. That narrative served a purpose then. It serves no purpose now. Wait a second. The record is recoverable. Archaeologists are still digging. Historians are still reading Song Dynasty administrative files. Linguists are still tracing the Sanskrit loanwords embedded in Tagalog, Cebuano, Maranao, words for concepts of governance, commerce, and spiritual authority that arrived long before Spanish replaced them with their own vocabulary. Every borrowed word is a fossil of a connection that was real. On the other hand, the Silk Road did not begin in Xi'an and end at Rome. It had branches. It had local masters. One of those branches ran through islands whose merchants knew the weight of gold before the first Spanish galleon was built, whose shipbuilders understood hydrodynamics before the word existed, whose political leaders understood negotiation as a form of art and commerce as a form of power. This history belongs to the people of the Philippines, not as a comforting myth, as a documented, excavated, inscribed, ship timber verified fact. Go find the Laguna copperplate inscription. Read what scholars have written about it. Search for the autumn boat excavations. Look at photographs of the golden artifacts in the Nyala Museum. Touch the evidence with your own curiosity. The story does not require a hero to tell it. It only requires someone willing to look. You now know where to look.